So before we do anything else, we're going to do a bit of cleanup. So just come in here to the character blueprint, and we're going to go over here to the for each loop. Let's just move this aside a little bit. And we're going to right click on the array element, say promote to variable, come up here and call it enemy element. And we're going to plug this into the for each loops. Just come over here, hold Control, left click, and drag this into the arrow here and release, and connect this back into line trace for objects. So over here on array element, we are going to hold Alt and left click to clear all the connections and connect this back into set enemy element. And now we have a reference for this enemy element, so we can just grab this from down here and plug this into all the places we had connections earlier. We're basically doing this just to make less of a rat's nest in the lines, and just make it easier to see where everything is and where everything goes. Alright, so that should be it. So we can just compile this and hit play so we can test if it still works. That looks good. So just hit escape. And now we are going to come over to, let's see here. Yeah, this old chunk which controls the rotation for the camera. We're going to left click and drag across all these nodes. If you accidentally get more nodes than you want, just hold Control and click to deselect, or if you didn't grab all the ones you wanted, just hold Control and select. And yeah, with all these selected, we're going to right click on one of them and come down to collapse to function. Left click, and here we have made collapsed all those nodes into one node. And the connections aren't correct right now, so we're just going to grab this again with holding control and just left click and drag this across here and plug this back in here. Grab these and just place them closer to the rest of the nodes, and now we have much cleaner looking line of nodes here, and that should still work properly. So we can just compile again, play again, and see if it still works, and it still works. So now we have cleaned up some space. And let's give this new function a different name. So just come over here to on the left hand side and right click, say rename, and let's call it camera rotation. All right. Oh, maybe want to give that a capital C. All right. And compile and save. Now the first bit of extra functionality we're going to add is for what if our target dies. So let's go back into viewport and come down to enemy BP, just enter that, and we need to make some space there, so let's just drag this out a bit, like so, and we're going to add a variable. So let's just right click here, promote variable, and let's call this is locked on. Alright, and we need two of it, so just have this selected, move your mouse up, hold Control and press W, and let's connect these from out of the flip-flop. So just hold Control here, left click, drag in, and same up here. We're going to need this condition to be in both of them, and let's go whoop and whoop. So these are connected. Next thing what we need to do is add the actual logic for if our target dies. So let's add a first of all a custom event. Let's call this die, and going to add destroy actor There we go, destroy actor. And add a branch for our is locked on. And let's drag out of true here and say cast to, I did misspell it, cast to third person character. Here we go. And from object here, you can drag out and say get player character. And so what this does is say that when we have a event that says our enemy dies, we're going to destroy that actor. We're going to check if it's locked on, and then we're going to send a message to our third-person character. So now we need to go back into the third-person character and add some logic there. So here we need to, first of all, add a custom event here as well. We're going to call this, target killed, and plug this in here. So basically, when the custom event target killed runs, we're going to lock off our target. And the reason we need to go in and add this here is so we can go back into enemy blueprint and add it here. Oh, target. There we go. Target killed. And basically, what's going to happen now is when our actor dies, or our enemy dies, it sends a message to our third-person character and says that we should lock off. But you may have noticed we have this custom event here, which never gets activated. So that's something we're going to need to do as well. Back in the third-person character, let's add a temporary input. Let's just say F key. Board, please. Thank you. And we're going to say get all vectors of class. We're going to make this for enemy BP. And here we're going to drag out and say die, which was our custom event in our enemy blueprint. And just drag this across here, or so I thought. What? Oh, right. You need to compile. There we go. There we go. There we go. And drag out, and let's try this again. Die, flap, flap, and now things should work. Let's go out into our viewport, going to lock onto our targets, and if we hit F, he should be destroyed. And he is, and our camera moves perfectly fine afterwards. Now, if you're curious about what would happen if we didn't have this here, you can just plug this out and compile again and go back into the viewport and see what happens if our target gets killed when this logic is not implemented. So just hit F, and now we see our camera is locked at a seemingly random spot in the world, which actually equates to the location 0, 0, 0 in the X, Y, and Z axes. And that's why we add this logic that we just added. So the next thing we're going to add is some logic for what happens when you break the line of sight. So let's just find an empty spot in the grid. Down here is good. And the first thing we're going to do is add a custom event. So just right click and type in custom and add the custom event, and we're going to call this break line of sight. From that, we're going to make a branching point. So just hold B and left click to add branch. Drag this in. In the condition here, we want the target locked, so just drag this out right in here, release. Next we want a get all actors of class, just drag out and type in get all actors of class here. You want this class to be the enemy BP. Next we want to set an array here. Just drag out here. No, don't drag out there. Right click here and promote to variable. So we get this variable here, and we're going to call this enemy array. And from this array, we're going to drag out, release, and type in remove. And we want remove item. Right? And the item we want to remove is nearest target. So yeah, come over on the left hand side here and grab the nearest target and drag that in here. Oops. And also we need to drag this in over here. I'm going to get back to what this does in a bit. The next thing we want is a line trace for objects. So just drag out here, type line trace object. Nope, that's not the right one. Let's do that again. That's the one we want. And for our start and end location here, we can see the ones we used over here, and we can just grab these. Actually, no, I'm lying to you. We don't want to use those. We want to use some different ones, actually. So just come up here and grab the follow camera, drag it in, release. And we're going to drag out here and say get world location and plug that in here. And for the end, we actually want to get a copy of nearest target. Just click on that, come down here, Control W to copy it. And I'm going to copy this one too, so select it, Control W to copy that too. Just plug this in here and plug that in here. Oops. And for the object types, now we can just come over here and grab this. So select it, come back down, Control W and get a copy of that in here, and we need to plug this in as well. And for actors to ignore, we actually want a reference to this one. So we can come over here on the left hand side, grab enemy array and drop that in here. Oh, there we go. So let's talk about this section here for a bit. What this does, it grabs all our enemies and puts them into an array. And then from that array, it removes our target. And the reason we want to do that is because if we don't do that, all our enemies will basically interrupt our line of sight and break our line of sight, which means if there are more than 2 enemies on the screen, one of those enemies might block the line of sight from our target, and even though we can still see our target, our line of sight is broken and we're locked off. But we also need to remove the nearest target from that array, because if not, the line trace can't even see our nearest target, so we would immediately break the line of sight upon logging on. So basically we're doing this just to make things, well, we needed to make things work. Right, moving on, we are going to add another branch over here. Just drag this across, and we want a braid hit result, so we can drag out from out hit. And actually we have it right here. Just click on that. And we want a equal objects. There we go. And we want hit actor to be our nearest target. So we can come over here and grab a reference to our nearest target. and put that condition in here. So basically, so long as we hit our nearest target, this says true. And we want to have a retriggerable delay after this. So retriggerable delay, and I'm gonna say 2 seconds. So this is for how long our line of sight needs to be broken before we say lock off. Speaking of lock off, we need to add a custom event that actually locks off our targets. So I'm gonna go over here, and we are going to add a custom event, and I'm going to call it lock off. I'm going to put this right here, and we need another branching point. I'm going to put this right in here and say if it's true, we go to continue on with locking off again. And the condition here will be if we're locked in the first place. So basically, breaking a line of sight will do nothing if we're not already locked on rather. So now we need to come back here and actually add a call for that lock off custom event. So there we are, and that should be it. So just compile and save. No, actually, I just remembered there's one thing we haven't done yet. We have to get a call for this, otherwise the break line of sight never starts. So we're going to come up here, and from the timeline, I'm going to drag out and say break line of sight. And that's going to just plug nicely in between the gate, and now that should be it. So let's compile again, save again, and let's test this too. So we're locked on, run back here and behind this wall, and you see the cone in distance disappears, indicating that we're now locked off. That works. So with that done, we're going to add logic for a lock off on distance. So the first thing we're going to do is go over to viewport, and we're going to add a sphere collision. Just add that there, and let's call it lock on radius, only spelled correctly. And then yeah, that location is fine. So just compile that and go over to construction script. I'm going to pull out here and say set sphere radius, and you see it wants to add the lock on radius sphere right away, so that's fine. Let's clean this up a bit, and we want the in sphere radius to be the same as minimum distance to enable. So let's just drag that out, plug that in there, and there we go. So now whatever the float value is for minimum distance to enable is going to be the same, or rather the sphere's radius is going to be the same as minimum distance to enable size. And 600 is a bit small, so let's just increase that to 1000 right away. And one more thing we want to do before we move on is go back into the lock on radius sphere, and we want to turn off all collision, because as things stand, we don't want this to collide with anything. We just want it purely as a indicator on what the range is. So let's set this to custom, and we're going to click here to ignore everything, so no collision whatsoever, and we don't want any overlap with events or anything. So with that done, we can compile again, and we can go into play and see that we've forgotten to do something. And what we've forgotten to do is come up here and say hidden, and click this off. We don't want it to be hidden in the game, we want to see it. That's the point of an indicator. So with that fixed, compile again, play again, and you can see the sphere size there. So now with our indicator set up, let's go back into the event graph, and let's go down to right below this compare float, closest target distance, and set nearest target, and so forth. And let's add a custom event over here, and we're going to call this custom event, we're going to call it distance lock off. And we're going to add a branch after that, and it's going to be, again, target locked condition there, and we're going to add a copy of our distance from player check. So let's just select that, come down there, hold Control, press W. I'm going to connect that to true, and as before we want a or rather not as before, but this time we want a nearest target reference. Just grab that, plug that in here, pull it down, and we want to compare some distances here. So we want a copy of minimum distance to enable, get, and we want to have a let's see, a greater than symbol, and let's put you down here, and the distance is greater than, or rather the distance from player greater than minimum distance to enable. I'm going to add a new branch, plug that condition in here, and plug distance from player check in here. Yeah, and then we're going to add a do once. So right click, type do once, select that, and we're going to connect the false option up here. And then we're going to connect the set nearest target to reset. Now you can double click on this line here to get a reroute node and just move it out of the way so we get a clear line into the reset, just for, you know, aesthetic reasons. And lastly, we want to add a another call to our lock off event. So just drag out and say lock off. Now this logic also uses the lock off custom event which we added earlier. And now we also need to add a call for distance to lock off, because otherwise it doesn't get used. So again, we're going to come up here, and this time let's drag off from break line of sight and say distance. Make sure you typed correctly, unlike me, and just put that into there, and we can compile, and let's test if this works. So now we can see our radius, and what we want to happen is once our target is outside that radius, we want it to lock off automatically. So let's lock on and see what happens. And there it is. Locks off automatically when we get out of range. Now, let's look into how we can make this system work for multiple types of enemies, because right now it only really works for enemies that use the blueprint enemy BP. So to do that, let's first of all make a duplicate of our enemy BP. Just duplicate it. Let's call it alt enemy, just for simplicity. Let's go into this blueprint, and we're just going to delete everything. There we go, and compile, and let's drag this tab in with the others. And let's also, what's happened here? There we go. Let's add a copy of our new alternative enemy. And just to differentiate it, let's go back into our alt enemy and go over to viewport and mesh. And let's change the materials. Just press here and just choose any old material. Walnut, that looks good. Good and different. And that's already compiled, so let's just save our changes and hit play and see what we got. So now we have two enemies who use different blueprints. So as our lock-on system works right now, the closest enemy should be the one we lock onto. So let's go over to our new enemy and hit our lock-on button, and you'll see we lock on our existing enemy, or our first enemy, but not our new enemy. And that's because, again, our system only really works for enemies that use the enemy BP blueprint. So what we need to do to fix this is we need to enter our alt enemy BP, or any new enemy you have created. Go up to File, and go down to Reparent Blueprint. So hit that, and you get up this this list, and we're gonna find enemy BP, and just basically hit that, and yeah, reparent. That's fine. It's complaining because our enemy BP has a distance from player check, and our new blueprint also has that. So we can just delete this distance from player check. We don't need it. And we're going to compile, and everything should work fine now. So what we just did is we parented our enemy BP to alt enemy, or the other way around, really. So all functions that are in enemy BP are functions our new alt enemy BP will also use. Despite the fact that this is completely empty, it will use all these functions here. So when we hit play now and go over to our new enemy and hit T, you'll see we lock on again. So that's all you need to do. Just go into File and reparent to our enemy BP, and it's done. All new enemies will work. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to change the lock on visual. So if, like me, you find the cone rather disgusting, don't worry, we're going to get rid of it. What we're going to do instead is we're going to highlight enemies we're locked onto. And the first thing we need to make that happen is to create a material, specifically a highlight material. Now, the highlight material we're going to use, I basically jacked from the kid over at BB Dev Hub. So I'm going to add a link to his video in the description because it's a good video. Anywho, let's get into it. So just right click in the content browser, and we're going to find materials and textures and just add a material. We're going to call this again with the typing, like really. There, 5th time's the charm. Highlight material, double click to enter it, and right away we're going to change this a bit. So material domain, we're going to make post process. Then we're going to scroll down and find blendable location, and we're going to make it before translucency. Now let's just zoom out a bit and just get way over here because we're going to add a lot of nodes. So right click and say view size. Next we need a seal. Just plug that in there. And the next thing we need is a clamp. And on this clamp, our minimum default is going to be 1, and our maximum default is going to be 2. There, and we want a scalar parameter, so just hold S and left click. And we're going to call this outline width. So just come down here and we're going to change the name to outline width. So as you may have guessed, that's going to control our outline width. We're going to set that to 0.5 for now. Next thing, we're going to add a multiply node, so hold M and press left click. Just drag this scalar node in here, and from the clamp in here. We're going to add another multiply node, so again, hold M and left click. And we're going to drag this in here, and down here we're going to add a scene textile size. There we go, and let's plug that in here. Now we're going to add a mask, so right click, type mask, we want component mask. select that, and for this mask we only want the red channel, so you can go ahead and deselect the green channel. I'm going to plug that right into our multiply, or multiply right into that. We're going to duplicate this mask, so with it selected, come down here and hold Control and press W. And for this one, we're going to do just the opposite. We're going to deselect the red channel and select the green channel. And we're going to plug the multiply into this one as well. Now we need another scalar parameter, so just hold S and left click again. This one we're going to call max. Oops. And another scalar parameter down here, so hold S, left click. Whoa, that's not supposed to happen. Max, please. And we're going to call this other one min, as in minimum. And we're going to leave the default value for max unchanged, but for min we want -1. The next thing we're going to add is a couple of append nodes. Just right click and type append, and we want append vector. Just plug the red mask in here and scalar parameter up to B, and we want to duplicate this. Just with it selected, come down, hold Control and press W, and we're going to plug the top this into A and our mask into B. And now we're going to add a couple of more multiplies, so just hold M and left click again. And let's see, now we're going to put the min into B and B, and from the top append we want it to go into the top of the multiply, and from the bottom append the bottom multiply A. Let's just drag these out a bit just to make it more clear where the lines go. The next thing we want to add is a screen position node, so just right click up here and type in screen. See here, screen position, so just select that. And we want another mask node, so we can just grab this and duplicate it over here. Actually, let's move this up here, this mask up here. And for this mask, we want both red and green channels selected. So there we go. All right, and now let's add some add nodes. So just come over here and hold A and left click, and let's do that 4 times because we need 4 nodes. Surprise. And this is stupid positioning of me, so let's put that over there instead. And from the multiply nodes, we want to go to B to the 2 bottom add nodes, and from the appends we want to go to B on the 2 top, and from the mask node we want to go to A to all of them. So I'm going to drag all the way down to the bottom one, and I'm going to double click on the line, drag over here. And this way of doing it is really just a preference thing. I think it looks cleaner than if I were to drag 4 separate lines to each node. So the next thing we want to add is a few screen texture nodes, or I mean scene texture nodes. So just right click and type in scene texture. All right, and we're going to come over here and change this to custom depth. Let's see here. There we go, custom depth. And with that done, we're going to duplicate this 3 times to get 4 nodes. And you may have guessed from the positioning that these are going to plug right into the add nodes, like so. And now we actually want a 5th one further up here. And we're going to add some subtract nodes over here. So we cannot hold S this time. That would be a lie. There, math, subtract, that's what we want. And let's duplicate this 4 times as well, or 3 times rather. And just line that up down here. and we're gonna pull out of color into B, each one. And similarly to before, we want to drag this off to the bottom one, double click on the line, just get this in here, get these in here rather. La-di-da-di-hoo. So now we want a few more, or a couple of more add nodes. Just hold A and left click twice. Let's put them down here, and we're going to add this from this subtract into A and from this subtract into B, and likewise down here. And we're going to add another add node over here, and we're going to go from top add into A and bottom add into B. And we're going to add another scalar parameter, so just hold S and left click. Let's put this over here. And this is going to control the edge fall off. So let's just call it that, edge fall off. And this is going to be set to -100 on the default value. So now we're going to add a divide node. Can we hold D for that? I don't know. Hold D, left click, and yeah, that works. And just drag add into A and fall off into B. Now let's move this result node further away because we need even more space. And let's add another subtract node. So let's right click and press, or type rather, subtract. And we're going to set this A to A and leave the bottom one. And we're going to add a clamp node over here. So just right click and type in clamp. And you can just leave the default values on this one and just drag this in here. And up here, we're going to add another scalar parameter. So just hold S and left click. This one we're going to call outline intensity. Guess what it's for? And then we're going to add a multiply node, so hold M and left click. We're going to plug this this scalar parameter into B. And one more thing we need to do is we need to adjust the default value on this scalar parameter, and we're going to set it to 10. And now we need to add color. So come up here, right click, and say that's a color. I cannot for the life of me remember what it's called. You should think this is easy, but you know, I forget sometimes. Vector parameter, that's what we want. Let's just put that over here, and we're going to call this, whoops, highlight color. And as you might have guessed from the name, this is going to be the highlight color. You can make it whatever you want. I'm going to make it slightly off white, like so. And the next thing we want is a make float number 4, and we're just going to plug in all these connections to their corresponding ones. Then just plug this into multiply, and down here we want a lerp node from math linear interpolate, and here we're just going to plug in clamp to alpha, multiply it to B, and we want a scene texture, and this one we're going to change to post process. So let's click here and say post process input 0. Ooh, let's pull these back just a wee bit. Just a wee bit. And from color, we're going to drag into A. And from the lerp into the only choice we have in the result node, emissive color. And let's just save that. Now let's head back to our or this place, and we need to find the post-process volume on the side here. If you've made your own project and didn't use the third-person template, you may need to add your own post-processing volume. But if you use the third-person template, you'll already have one. So in the post-process volume, we need to scroll down and we need to find blending material, post-processing there. Under rendering features, post-process material, you find array, and we want to add one array element. Just hit plus there. I'm going to choose asset reference, and what we want to add here is our highlight material. So in the content browser, you can just highlight it here and press the arrow. Alternatively, you can find it with the magnifying glass and just search for it. And with that done, we need to do one more thing. We need to enable this in our enemy BP. So go into your enemy BP, and we're going to do this under the toggle target visual. We're going to grab these and we're just going to straight up delete them. And what we're going to add instead is a little something called set custom render depth, I believe it's called. Set render custom depth, that's the one. And we want the one that says mesh. All right, so we want two of it. So just with it selected, come down and say hold control and press W. We need the mesh to be connected to both of them. And we need these connected to their respective set render custom depth. And we need to say true on this one. Right, that should be everything, unless I've forgotten something, which does happen, but let's compile and play and see what happens. I'm going to hit T, and hopefully it's going to be a highlighted enemy. And there it is, highlighted enemy. And now you can actually even see it through your character's body, and you'll be able to see the highlight through walls and stuff. I think that's a neat feature. If you don't like it, sorry, I don't know how to change the highlight from being visible through your character and through other meshes. But I do think it's a way prettier indicator than the cone we used to have. So yeah, there you go. Highlighted enemies.